So Stuber is an action buddy comedy that kind of feels like a throwback to kind of like the buddy action pictures of the 1980s. It sounds weird to say like throwback because we've seen like a few of these films in the past few years, so it doesn't really feel like that much of a throwback. So whatever, you take it for what it's worth. Now, to complain that this film more or less sticks to the buddy cop formula, or even just like I guess yeah, it is kind of buddy cop formula. To say that it just sticks to that formula is that it's a hindrance is kind of like it's pointless. It's kind of like bickering about a romantic comedy. It's like you know where most romantic comedies are going, so to complain about the formula seems kind of pointless. So, namely, what I came into this film to kind of like judge it on is the chemistry between the two leads, because it's a buddy picture. So ultimately what really matters is if the two really do have chemistry and make this type of film work, because it's a very familiar formula. You could throw just about anyone into these roles, but what matters is how do these actors work together, and they actually work pretty well. Not great, but they have just enough where I think they can carry this film from kind of like veering off course, which it very easily could have done that. So essentially the story here is like Dave Bautista is playing Vic, an LAPD detective who has like he's out on the trail of a drug pusher. This is a guy he's been tracking for years. He killed his partner, so it's personal. And he's just, he's devoted his entire life to it. And he's kind of like shunned his daughter, and he probably shouldn't have done that. And so he's just trying to come to grips with himself. Now, at the same time, we establish Kumail as Stu, who's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. Whereas Dave Bautista is kind of like, the big, gruff, kind of like muscle-bound cop who doesn't admit to his feelings. Stu is very much he's meek, pretty much. He works at a sporting goods store, and his boss is a huge jerk to him, and he refuses to speak back to them, even though he really should, because he's violating like a lot of workplace ethics here. He has a female friend who they're gonna get into business together, and he clearly has feelings for her, but he doesn't quite want to admit to them because it seems like he always keeps like missing the boat with this woman. And so, to make ends meet, Stu ends up becoming an Uber driver, and he just so happens to get Vic on like the one craziest day of Vic's life. So on this one day, Vic has an art exhibit that he's got to get to for his daughter, but at the same time, he's got a lead on this gangster that he's been tracking, and he might be able to find him. But there's a problem: he just got eye surgery, so he can't quite see that well. His vision is slowly returning, so he can't drive. I mean, he tries to drive in one kind of hilarious scene where he gets all over the road, but he needs an Uber. So he ends up hiring Stu to be his Uber driver and more or less his partner in crime. Crime fighting, sorry. Even though they do kind of break a few rules here. So they're basically out on the trail trying to find out where this gangster is operating from, and they basically go from lead to lead in all these scummy places like dark warehouses and strip clubs and down by the docks and all that type of stuff, and they end up busting this whole crime conspiracy wide open. Like there's a betrayal, like there's a big twist here, but even though it's not really that big of a twist. Like if you're familiar with these types of pictures, you can pretty much see everything coming a mile away here. So it's fairly predictable in that regard. But in terms of the comedy, which is pretty much a big part of this, I gotta admit I did actually kind of like the chemistry between Stu and Vic. It actually kind of works. I mean, it's clearly like an odd couple mismatch thing. Vic is like the take no prisoners, like he's getting in a situation where we gotta punch guys, and Stu is more emotionally equipped to handle stuff. Like he's willing to tell Vic, like, dude, you're kind of being a dick to your daughter. You gotta fix this stuff. And so they kind of play off each other, even though it seems like there's so much like action going on here that it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot for Stu to add to this, other than kind of like the obvious here. There are some fairly funny moments between the two. Like I do like in one scene, in order to intimidate one of the gangsters, Stu has the great idea to hijack the gangster's Twitter account and basically posts that he loves Ryan Gosling over it. That's pretty funny. I just wish there was more of that type of stuff in there, because for most of the time it's just Dave Bautista being Dave Bautista. You know, he gets to do a lot of punching, he gets to do a lot of gunplay, he gets to do a lot of screaming, he gets to do a lot of intimidating. He does pretty much everything you expect. Same with Kumail. Kumail pretty much does everything you expect. He stammers, you know, he banters, he makes like kind of, you know, sly bickering, he kind of like screams and winces, pretty much everything you expect to happen with this type of scenario. And for the most part, it's pretty smile worthy. There's a few lines in here that are actually pretty funny. A few visual gags that are actually pretty funny too. They do, since it's R-rated, you know, they let the swears fly, they let the violence fly here. There's a lot of violent scenes here. One scene in particular that actually made me laugh out loud. Like, I was kind of smiling throughout most of the picture, but there was one particular scene that made me laugh. There's a scene where they're in a car chase, and Kumail has a propane tank, and he says, I'm going to throw the propane tank at the guys who are shooting at us in the other car, and then you're going to shoot it and it'll explode. Okay, now, comedy formula would dictate that one of two things would happen. Either the propane tank will do nothing, and then Kumail would stand, was like, oh, I saw it in the movies, it should have worked. Or the propane tank will not explode, but somehow hinder the car in some way. Neither of these happen. It's something different happens, and it was so surprising that it kind of caught me off guard, and I burst out laughing at that moment. So like, okay, this film got me. It was kind of going through the motions here and there, but in terms of showing some like shocking stuff here and there, it kind of surprised me. Some of the shocking stuff though does kind of come expected. Like for instance, in one scene they have to go to a male strip club. So naturally, of course, for the scene to be funny, there has to be a scene where Stu gets a call from this from his business partner, who basically wants him to come over for sex. And of course he has to do it. Of course he has to take the call in FaceTime. So there's a camera. Of course he has to do that. Because why? Because so we can have a naked guy walk in the background, and she can ask, "Where the hell are you?" And it pretty much goes through there. So it pretty much goes through all the same beats. So if you're expecting this film to deeply surprise you in any way, you're really going to be let down. Especially by the third act, it seems like they were so focused on just like the chemistry and the action of the picture that when it comes time to actually have a moment of the two connecting, of Bautista and Kumail, it feels like there's no time to actually to actually have something resonate very emotionally, that it slams into that third act by saying like where it pretty much outright states the goals, like, look, Stu has to become a man and Vic has to cry. That's essentially what their grander goal is here, as opposed to, just foiling the drug pushers. So it pretty much goes along those routes. There's a few fun lines here, there. I actually did kind of laugh at it here and there. I feel like it does really, and I know this is going to be a big point of contention for a lot of people. I feel like it does kind of miss the mark with trying to provide a commentary on masculinity. It just feels like the two extremes, and they kind of meet somewhere in the middle. But like I said, really forced together to meet in the middle rather than being organic, because there's so much other crazy crap going on in this film. It doesn't have time for it. So I gotta admit, like, I had fun. I had a decent amount of fun with Stuber. It's definitely not the best comedy I've seen this year, or even the best buddy comedy like I've seen this decade. There are plenty ahead of it. But for what it is, it comes as advertised, and it pretty much does what you expect, with like there were a few moments where I burst out laughing at this thing. So if you like your buddy comedies to be very, very, very intense, like to the point where these characters pretty much just like, there's a scene in here where they flat out just beat the crap out of each other, just like mercilessly, where to the point where like both Dave Bautista and Kumail are just laying on the ground, just covering their nuts because they've been beating the crap out of each other. If you like that type of humor, it mostly gets the job done. So I had a decent amount of I had a decent time with this film, I guess is the way to say it. I smiled here and there, I laughed here and there. I got just enough out of it that I had a good time. So for Stuber, 3 out of 5 stars.